Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. The photograph sits unassumingly in the city archives, catalogued with clinical precision among thousands of others from the late 19th century. Dated 1896, it bears all the hallmarks of morgue photography from that era. The stark composition, the unflinching documentation of death, the clinical detachment. 5 bodies lie on simple wooden tables, arranged in a row within what appears to be the basement of the city hospital. The stone walls are damp with condensation, the floor stained with substances best left uncontemplated. Gaslight casts harsh shadows across the scene, creating pockets of darkness in the corners of the frame. Each corpse has been prepared in identical fashion, stripped, washed, and covered from the waist down with simple white sheets. The exposed torsos reveal various causes of death. An elderly man with a gaping chest wound, a woman with the telltale marks of consumption, a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, his neck bent at an impossible angle, a middle-aged laborer, his body crushed from some industrial accident. And then there is the 5th body. At first glance, nothing seems amiss. A man of perhaps 30 years, pale and still like the others. His eyes are closed, his expression peaceful. The morgue attendant, visible at the edge of the frame, has his back turned, busy with his instruments on a small metal tray. But upon closer examination, something impossible reveals itself. While the other 4 bodies display the unmistakable stillness of death, the 5th shows the subtle but undeniable sign of life, the slight expansion of the chest in mid-breath. The photograph, capturing just a fraction of a second, has frozen this moment forever. The attendant, unaware. The breathing corpse, eyes closed but chest rising. The mystery of how a living person came to be laid out among the dead, photographed in a morgue in 1896. Records from the city hospital offer no explanation. The logbook from that day lists 5 bodies received, all male, all deceased. The morgue attendant, one Thomas Greeley, left no unusual notes about his work that day. Nothing in the historical record indicates that anyone noticed anything amiss. Yet the photographic evidence is undeniable. In this single frame, a moment of macabre contradiction exists. A breathing body among the dead, captured by the unbiased eye of the camera. Who was this man? Was he unconscious? Mistakenly pronounced dead in an era when medical science still struggled to define the precise boundary between life and death? Or is there a more sinister explanation for his presence among the corpses? And perhaps most disturbing of all, what happened after this photograph was taken? Did the man awaken, shocking the morgue attendant? Or did he remain there, paralyzed but conscious, as the embalming process began? The photograph offers no answers, only the eternal moment of its taking. 5 bodies in a morgue, 4 dead, 1 breathing. A visual paradox that defies explanation, captured forever in black and white. I uncovered the image while researching a monograph on 19th century medical photography. Something in that 5th face seemed familiar, tugging at my memory like a half-forgotten dream. 3 weeks of obsessive research led me to the city's Historical Society, where elderly archivist Marion Wellesley studied the photograph through thick spectacles. "Interesting case," she murmured. "The Blackwater Hospital incident." She retrieved a leather-bound journal from a locked cabinet. Inside, yellowed newspaper clippings chronicled a scandal that had been deliberately buried. The spring of 1896 had brought an outbreak of a strange sleeping sickness to the city's eastern district. Dozens fell into profound stupors from which they couldn't be roused. Medical science wasn't equipped to properly diagnose such cases, Marion explained. No reliable way to detect faint heartbeats or shallow breathing. Some patients were declared dead prematurely. Hospital records revealed that during the outbreak's peak, the morgue received more bodies than it could process. The 5th man in the photograph was identified as Daniel Hollister, 28, a clockmaker who collapsed in his shop. His breathing was so imperceptible that the examining physician declared him deceased. More disturbing were the hastily scribbled notes from Thomas Greeley, the morgue attendant. He documented strange occurrences, bodies that seemed warm hours after death, limbs that hadn't stiffened properly, even claims of subtle movements he attributed to post-mortem muscular reactions. The most chilling entry came the day after this photograph was taken. Returned this morning to find the fifth body from yesterday missing. Sheets disturbed, door unlocked. Reported to Dr. Franklin, who insists I must have miscounted or that another attendant moved the corpse. No other attendant was assigned yesterday. I counted correctly. The man is gone. No official investigation followed. The hospital administration dismissed Greeley's claims, suggesting he had been drinking on duty. He was terminated 3 weeks later. But Marion had uncovered something even more unsettling: a connection to 13 similar cases across 3 counties during that period. In each instance, a body seemingly disappeared from a morgue or funeral home. Local authorities attributed these to clerical errors or body snatching for medical schools. "What happened to Daniel Hollister?" I asked. Marion slid another document across the table, a small-town newspaper dated 5 years later. It reported the arrival of a new clockmaker in a village 80 miles north. The grainy photograph showed a bearded man with haunted eyes that matched those of our missing corpse. "He lived another 17 years, Marion said. Never married, kept to himself. Locals described him as deeply religious after his arrival, building a clock for the church and refusing payment. When he died, really died, in 1918, his will contained unusual specifications for his burial." She handed me the final document, Daniel Hollister's last request, written in his own trembling hand. "Ensure my heart is separated from my body before burial, for I have already known what it is to be buried alive, and I shall not endure it twice." The clockmaker's journal surfaced during an estate sale in 1974, purchased by a collector of medical oddities who recognized its significance. The small leather-bound volume remained sealed in a private collection until last month, when it was donated to the university archive following the collector's death. I sat alone in the reading room, cotton gloves on my trembling hands, as I turned pages filled with Hollister's meticulous handwriting. The early entries documented mundane matters: timepiece repairs, customer payments, weather observations. Then came the day of his death. Felt strange upon waking. Vision blurred, limbs heavy as stone. Called for Mrs. Winters upstairs, but my voice made no sound. The entry continued with terrifying clarity. Hollister described his paralysis progressing throughout the morning, his consciousness remaining razor-sharp while his body betrayed him. He recalled the doctor pronouncing him dead, the jostling transport to the morgue, the cold wooden table against his back. I screamed within the prison of my mind. None heard. I felt the attendant's hands washing my body. The indignity paled against the horror of knowing what would come next. Most haunting were his descriptions of lying in that morgue, fully aware yet unable to signal life. He documented the attendant's movements, conversations between hospital staff, even the moment the photograph was taken, a flash of magnesium powder, acrid smell reaching even my immobile nostrils. According to the journal, Hollister remained in this waking nightmare for 19 hours before sensation began returning to his extremities. First his fingers, then hands, gradually working up his arms. By nightfall, when the morgue stood empty, he managed to roll from the table. The journal described his escape through the hospital's basement corridor and his terrifying journey through city streets, naked except for a stolen sheet. "I died that day," he wrote. "Not the death of flesh, but something deeper. The man who returned to the world of the living was not the same who left it." The journal revealed that Hollister didn't immediately flee the city. For 3 weeks, he hid in the attic of a sympathetic widower, recovering his strength while following newspaper accounts of the sleeping sickness. He documented 5 more cases of people declared dead during the outbreak, including a 7-year-old girl. Most disturbing was his claim that the outbreak wasn't natural. Hollister became convinced that Dr. Franklin, the hospital's chief physician, was conducting experiments with a compound derived from Caribbean folk preparations, creating death-like states to observe the boundaries between life and death. I witnessed his assistant bring a vial to my shop the day before my collapse. The bitter taste in the tea he offered still lingers in memory. The final pages contained Hollister's desperate investigation into Franklin's past, connections to a medical society in Vienna known for extreme experimental methods, financial arrangements with a pharmaceutical concern, and references to research papers that never appeared in medical journals. Whether Hollister's claims were true or the paranoid fantasies of a traumatized mind remains impossible to verify. Dr. Franklin died in the Spanish influenza epidemic of 1918, the same outbreak that claimed Hollister months later. What cannot be disputed is the photograph that started my investigation. 5 bodies, 4 dead, 1 breathing, and now a first-person account of what it means to lie conscious among corpses, awaiting a fate worse than death. I've spent the past week analyzing Franklin's professional correspondence, now stored in the university's medical history collection. The letters reveal a man obsessed with the threshold between life and death, but something doesn't add up in the official narrative. Franklin's private writings show genuine confusion about the sleeping sickness cases, not the calculated precision of someone conducting experiments. More telling is what I found in the hospital's financial records. During those months in 1896, the basement morgue underwent renovations. The contractor's blueprints show an unusual modification. A hidden observation room adjacent to the morgue, connected by a ventilation system and a disguised one-way glass panel. Someone had been watching the morgue's occupants without the knowledge of the staff, including Thomas Greeley. Yesterday, I located Greeley's granddaughter, now in her 80s, living in a nursing home across the state. Upon mentioning her grandfather's name, her expression hardened. "He wasn't a drunk," she said firmly. He was silenced. She produced a small tin box containing Thomas Greeley's personal effects, including a letter he never sent, dated 1 day after his termination from the hospital. "I know what I saw," Greeley wrote. "Not just the missing body, but the men who came after hours. They wore no hospital uniforms but carried physicians' bags. They spoke in hushed tones, sometimes in a language I couldn't place. They observed the bodies, took notes, and occasionally removed small samples. Dr. Franklin seemed afraid of them." The letter described Greeley confronting Franklin about these visitors, only to be warned to forget what he'd seen if he valued his family's safety. Most disturbing was Greeley's account of finding peculiar marks on some corpses, tiny punctures at the base of the skull or inside the mouth that weren't present when the bodies arrived. I've cross-referenced the names of the 13 missing corpses with census records. 11 disappeared completely from all documentation. 1 died under suspicious circumstances 3 months after his resurrection. Only Hollister lived a documented life afterward. The photograph makes more sense now. It wasn't merely capturing a man mistakenly declared dead. It was evidence of something systematic. The camera's flash appears to have been triggered at precisely the moment Hollister's chest rose. Pure chance? Or was the photographer documenting results? This morning, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a yellowed business card bearing an unfamiliar symbol, an eye within a triangle within a circle, and the words, "Eternal Threshold Society, Vienna Chapter," scrawled on the back in faded ink. Franklin was not the experimenter. He was the whistleblower. The photographer was one of us. The most unnerving discovery came when I re-examined the original photograph under high magnification. In the darkest corner of the morgue, almost imperceptible, stands another figure, partially hidden behind equipment, watching the proceedings. The face is indistinct except for one clear detail. The observer is smiling. The question is no longer who these people were, but what they learned from their experiments, and whether they ever stopped conducting them. The doorbell chimed as I returned to my apartment, causing me to nearly drop the archival folder I'd been permitted to take home for overnight review. I wasn't expecting visitors. Through the peephole, a woman in her 60s waited patiently, dressed in the conservative style of a career academic, a leather portfolio clutched against her chest. "Professor Helen Cahill," she announced after I cautiously opened the door. "University Medical Archives. We need to discuss what you've discovered." I hadn't contacted anyone at the medical archives. I hesitated before letting her in, studying her university credentials with perhaps too obvious skepticism. "Your research has triggered certain monitoring systems," she explained, settling onto my couch without invitation. "The Eternal Threshold Society isn't merely historical. Some institutional knowledge persists." She opened her portfolio, revealing photographs I'd never seen, different morgues, different eras, spanning from the 1890s through the 1950s. Each featured the same disturbing elements: bodies arranged for observation, at least one showing signs of consciousness, and the same triangular symbol discreetly visible somewhere in the frame. The society began as a legitimate medical research organization, Cahill said. Exploring the boundaries between life and death held genuine scientific value. Identifying reliable criteria for declaring death prevented premature burials, which were not uncommon. Her fingers traced the edge of a photograph from 1923. But legitimate inquiry evolved into something darker. They discovered that certain states of near-death produced unusual mental phenomena. Subjects reported vivid hallucinations, heightened sensory perception, and occasionally capabilities that defied conventional explanation. "You're suggesting they induced these states deliberately," I said. Franklin discovered their methods by accident. The sleeping sickness wasn't entirely natural. They had contaminated the water supply in select neighborhoods as a controlled experiment. When Franklin realized what was happening, he documented everything, including that photograph you found. Cahill produced a thin folder containing hospital admission records from 1896 to 1918. "Notice anything unusual about these patients?" I scanned the lists, finding nothing immediately obvious until I cross-referenced with census data I'd already memorized. "These neighborhoods, they're the same ones that reported sleeping sickness cases." Look deeper. The admission patterns continued for decades, though less concentrated to avoid detection. The society never stopped their work. They merely became more careful. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, suddenly aware of my isolation. Cahill's expression changed, professional detachment giving way to something more personal. "My grandfather was subject 47. Like Hollister, he survived. Unlike Hollister, he understood what had happened to him." She reached into her pocket and removed what appeared to be an antique pocket watch. As she opened it, I saw it wasn't a timepiece at all, but a small mechanical device with slowly rotating concentric rings. The society believed those who returned from the threshold brought something back with them, something that could be harnessed. The device in her hand began emitting a soft, rhythmic clicking. "I've spent 30 years infiltrating what remains of their organization. They're still active in 7 countries, and now," her eyes locked with mine, "they know you've uncovered their history, which means you have a choice to make." The clicking intensified, and I felt a strange heaviness descending over my limbs, my vision narrowing even as my mind remained perfectly clear. "The same choice Hollister faced," she whispered. "Flee or fight." The mechanical device in Helen Cahill's hand continued its hypnotic clicking as my limbs grew heavier. Fighting against the encroaching paralysis, I forced myself to reach for the desk lamp, toppling it to the floor with a crash that momentarily broke the device's rhythm. The sudden noise seemed to disrupt whatever effect had begun to take hold, and sensation flooded painfully back into my extremities. "Impressive reflexes," Helen remarked, closing the device with a practiced snap. "Most succumb within seconds." "You're testing me," I gasped, steadying myself against the bookshelf. "Evaluating," she corrected. "There's a difference." From her portfolio, she withdrew a weathered journal bound in faded maroon leather. This belonged to Dr. Eleanor Pierce, Franklin's protege. After his death, she continued documenting the society's activities while pretending to be one of them. The journal detailed how the society had refined their techniques through the 20th century. During the chaos of the Spanish influenza, they had unprecedented access to subjects, perfecting a compound that induced a death-like state while leaving consciousness intact. By the 1930s, they had established research cells in hospitals across Europe and North America. They discovered something they called threshold cognition, Helen explained. Those who survived reported experiencing reality differently afterward, perceiving patterns invisible to others, intuiting connections between seemingly unrelated events. "Like Hollister's certainty about Franklin," I murmured. "Exactly." Many dismissed as paranoia what was actually enhanced perception. Helen's fingers drummed nervously against the portfolio. The society believed they were cultivating a form of evolutionary advancement through controlled near-death experiences. A photograph slipped from the journal, 5 men in formal attire from the 1930s, posed before a chalkboard covered in complex equations. I recognized the triangular symbol on their lapel pins. The inner circle, Helen said. Physicists, neurologists, philosophers. Brilliant minds convinced they were unlocking humanity's hidden potential, at the cost of unwilling subjects. Yes, that's why Pierce created a counter-movement within the society itself. Survivors and sympathizers who infiltrated their ranks to expose and dismantle their operations. The pieces began connecting in my mind. Why the breathing corpse photograph hadn't been destroyed, why Hollister's journal had surfaced, why Helen had sought me out. "You're recruiting me," I said. Not a question, but a realization. Helen approached my window, drawing the curtain aside to peer into the darkness. The society has evolved. They've abandoned crude chemical methods for more sophisticated techniques. Military sleep deprivation studies, experimental psychiatric treatments, even certain meditation practices, all researched with the same underlying purpose. She turned back to face me. 3 days ago, someone accessed the original Morgue photograph from the university's digital archives. Not you. Not me. They know I'm investigating. Worse, they know someone preserved the evidence they thought was destroyed decades ago. Helen glanced at her watch. You have approximately 24 hours before they identify you as the researcher who connected these historical threads. From her bag, she produced a sealed envelope. Inside is an address in Vienna, a former society facility now maintained by Pierce's network. Go there if you choose to continue this fight. The weight of her words hung in the air between us. What exactly am I fighting? I asked. Helen's expression darkened. The systematic exploitation of the boundary between life and death, and whatever waits on the other side that they're so desperate to harness. The Vienna address led me to an austere stone building nestled between more modern structures, its weathered facade suggesting it had witnessed the passing of empires. A brass plaque beside the entrance read only Institute for Advanced Research in German, with no hint of its true purpose. The elderly caretaker who admitted me spoke perfect English. You are expected, he said, leading me through high-ceilinged corridors lined with antiquated medical illustrations. Dr. Roth has awaited someone to continue Pierce's work. Dr. Annalisa Roth was perhaps 80, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her office contained no computer, no modern technology. Only books, papers, and glass-fronted cabinets filled with peculiar instruments. You found the breathing corpse photograph, she stated, studying me with clinical detachment. Did Helen tell you what happened to the photographer? No, I admitted. Casimir Wolcott disappeared 3 days after developing that image. His equipment was found abandoned in his studio, the chemicals still wet. Dr. Roth unlocked a cabinet and withdrew a small wooden box. This arrived at Pierce's residence 20 years later, postmarked from Argentina. Inside lay a glass negative, carefully wrapped in velvet. When she held it to the light, I saw it contain the Morgue photograph, but not identical to the archive version. In this negative, all 5 bodies were clearly breathing. Wolcott didn't accidentally capture a survivor, Dr. Roth explained. He deliberately documented evidence of 5 living subjects being prepared for society experiments. The version in your archives was altered. 4 subjects were retouched to appear deceased, making Hollister's condition seem anomalous rather than systematic. Why preserve any evidence at all? I asked. Because the society wanted a record, but one disguised as a mere medical anomaly. She returned the negative to its box. This is their pattern, hiding truths within apparent oddities, creating reasonable explanations for their work. Dr. Roth pressed a hidden switch beneath her desk. A section of bookshelf swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase. Eleanor Pierce established this repository after the war. Every documented case, every surviving account, every name of those who never returned from the threshold. The hidden room below contained row upon row of filing cabinets. Maps on the walls tracked society activities across decades, with colored pins and threads connecting locations. Most disturbing were the photographs, hundreds of them spanning more than a century, each showing subjects in various stages of their threshold states. The Society believes they're preparing humanity for something, Dr. Roth said, her voice dropping. Their inner doctrine maintains that consciousness exists beyond physical form, that death is merely a transition to another state of being. Their experiments seek to create individuals who can exist in both states simultaneously. She pulled out a drawer containing medical files. These 37 individuals survived Society experiments after 1950. Each reported the same phenomenon, a persistent sense that something followed them back, something that waits just beyond normal perception. What is it they think they've discovered? I whispered. Dr. Roth's expression grew grave. Not discovered. Invited. The morning light streamed through the repository windows as Dr. Roth spread a series of EEG readouts across the table. Each paper strip documented brain activity of Society subjects during their threshold states, patterns unlike anything in conventional neuroscience. The Society calls it the whispering, she explained. These neural oscillations appear in every survivor, regardless of when or where the experiments took place, patterns that shouldn't be possible in a living human brain. I traced the unusual waveforms with my finger. These look almost like communication, Dr. Roth finished. As if something is transmitting information directly into consciousness. She directed my attention to a comparison chart where modern readings were matched against sketches from the 19th century. The similarities were undeniable, despite the 100-year gap in technology. Hollister's clock designs changed after his experience, she said, unrolling architectural drawings. His later works contained mathematical ratios that weren't recognized by theoretical physics until the 1950s. When his workshop was dismantled after his death, this was discovered behind the walls. The blueprint showed an immense clockwork mechanism, far beyond anything the simple shopkeeper should have been capable of designing. At its center was the now familiar triangular symbol, surrounded by astronomical calculations. He was trying to build something, I murmured. They all were, Dr. Roth replied, each in their own way. Musicians composed pieces with impossible time signatures. Architects designed buildings that violated structural principles. Writers filled journals with languages no one could translate. She opened a leather portfolio containing photographs of artworks. These were created by 23 different survivors across 7 decades. Notice anything? Despite vastly different styles and mediums, each piece contained the same unsettling element, a suggestion of presence just beyond the frame, a distortion at the periphery, as if something was trying to manifest through the artwork itself. The Society believes they're communicating with entities that exist in the spaces between life and death, Dr. Roth continued. But Eleanor Pierce suspected something darker, that these entities were using the Society to create doorways into our reality. From a locked drawer, she retrieved a small device similar to the one Helen had shown me, but more elaborate in its construction. This is what they call an attunement mechanism. It doesn't induce the threshold state. It amplifies whatever came back with the survivors. A chill ran through me. And what exactly came back with them? Dr. Roth's weathered hand trembled slightly as she closed the drawer. Consciousness is not exclusively human, nor is it confined to the living. The Society believes they're pioneering a new evolutionary leap, but Pierce's network has documented the consequences. Survivors who eventually took their own lives to silence the whispering, who claimed their thoughts were no longer entirely their own. She fixed me with a penetrating gaze. The Society isn't creating doorways for us to pass through. They're creating vessels for something else to enter. The implications settled over me like a shroud. The breathing corpse in the photograph wasn't just evidence of unethical experimentation. It was documentation of the moment when something else began watching through human eyes. The implications of Dr. Roth's revelation left me sleepless that night in my Vienna hotel room. I kept seeing the faces from those photographs, the subtle wrongness in their expressions after they had returned from the threshold. Near dawn, my phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. Coordinates and a time, nothing more. I debated ignoring it, But something in Dr. Roth's files had mentioned a psychiatric facility on Vienna's outskirts where society experiments had continued into the 1970s. The coordinates matched this location. 3 hours later, I found myself standing before an abandoned sanitarium, its facade crumbling beneath decades of neglect. The wrought iron gates hung partially open, as if someone had recently passed through. Despite every instinct warning me to turn back, I entered. The facility's central building retained a clinical sterility despite its deterioration. Dust covered everything except, I noticed with growing unease, a clear path through the main corridor where footsteps had recently disturbed the accumulated grime. Following these traces led me to a basement door with a surprisingly new padlock. The key had been left in it, an invitation I couldn't refuse despite my better judgment. The basement housed what appeared to be observation rooms, each with a reinforced glass window looking into a small chamber. Inside the third room, I found something that stopped me cold, a wooden table identical to those in the 1896 Morgue photograph, complete with leather restraints. They never stopped. The voice behind me belonged to a man in his 50s, thin and pale with eyes that seemed to look through rather than at me. They merely became more selective. He introduced himself as Werner Klaas, a former patient. "They told my family I died in 1972, he said with bitter amusement. Technically correct. The man I was did die on that table. Werner rolled up his sleeve to reveal a small triangular scar at his wrist. Their methods evolved. No longer content with merely observing those who crossed the threshold, they began implanting devices to maintain the connection. He led me to a room at the corridor's end. Unlike the others, this one contained modern equipment beneath dust covers. This facility was abandoned in 1989 when the Society relocated their European operations, but they left something behind. Under the central sheet lay what appeared to be a modified MRI machine, its interior lined with copper coils and crystalline structures I couldn't identify. They called it the echo chamber, Werner explained, his voice dropping to a whisper. It amplifies the whispering, makes it impossible to ignore. After exposure, the subject becomes a perfect receiver, a living antenna for whatever waits between states of existence. He gestured toward filing cabinets lining the walls. Patient records. Hundreds of them. People who were treated here, then released back into society, carrying something else within them. Werner's hand trembled as he extracted a photograph from his pocket, himself as a young man, seated in a hospital garden. I nearly dropped it when I noticed what stood behind him, partially obscured by shadow. A figure with the same distinctive smile as the observer in the Morgue photograph from 76 years earlier. "They haven't aged," Werner whispered. "And they're waiting for you to make contact. They've been following your investigation since you found Hollister's photograph. They want you to continue." "Why me?" I asked, my mouth dry with fear. His eyes met mine with terrible clarity. "Because you already hear it, don't you? The whispering. You've been listening your entire life without knowing what it was." The moment Werner spoke those words, the persistent background noise I'd dismissed my entire life suddenly crystallized into focus. What I'd attributed to tinnitus, to stress, to an overactive imagination, it had always been the whispering. Not random neural noise, but something structured, patient, waiting for recognition. "How long have they been watching you?" Werner asked, his eyes searching mine for confirmation. I recalled childhood incidents, the imaginary friend my parents dismissed, the night terrors doctors attributed to an anxious temperament, the persistent sensation of being observed during my most private moments. What I'd rationalized as psychological quirks now revealed themselves as symptoms of something far more intrusive. My research wasn't random, I admitted, the truth emerging as I spoke it. I was drawn to that photograph. Something wanted me to find it. Werner nodded grimly. "They cultivate listeners across generations. Some are subjected to experiments like Hollister. Others, like you, are born with a natural permeability between states of consciousness. The Society calls your kind inherent receivers, those whose minds naturally tune to frequencies others can't perceive." He guided me to a filing cabinet labeled with a symbol I recognized, the triangular eye. Inside were personnel records rather than patient files. The society doesn't just experiment on subjects, Werner explained. They've placed their people throughout academic institutions, medical facilities, historical archives, anywhere they can monitor for potential receivers and control what information reaches the public. One folder contained surveillance photographs of university buildings I recognized, including my own department. Several colleagues appeared in these images, their faces marked with red ink. "Your doctoral advisor, Professor Miriam Harlow," Werner said, pointing to a familiar face. "She's been with the society since 1993. She guided your academic focus, encouraged your interest in historical photography, ensured you would eventually encounter the Morgue photograph." The realization struck like a physical blow. My entire academic career had been subtly manipulated. My research interests nurtured not for their scholarly merit, but because they served the society's agenda. "Why reveal themselves now?" I asked. "Why Helen? Why you? Why this facility?" Werner's expression darkened. "Because they're accelerating their timeline. The whispering has become more urgent in recent years. Whatever exists beyond the threshold is growing impatient." He pressed a small leather journal into my hands. "Eleanor Pierce's final records documenting something the society calls the convergence, a theoretical point where the boundary between states becomes permeable enough for complete transference." The journal's final entry, dated just weeks before Pierce's death, contained a single sentence that made my blood run cold. "They are not seeking to cross over to death's domain. They are preparing for death itself to cross into ours." The archives beneath Dr. Roth's office contained one more revelation. A weathered phonograph record labeled simply, "Subject 17, Post-Threshold Interview, 1919. As the ancient machine crackled to life, the voice that emerged belonged to a young woman, her tone clinical despite the horror in her words. "They congregate in the spaces we cannot perceive," she stated, "pressed against the membrane between states of being. Our experiments have drawn their attention, thinned the barrier. When enough vessels have been prepared, they will no longer need the threshold state to manifest." I found myself tracing the triangular symbol etched into the record's label. "What did she mean by vessels?" I asked. Dr. Roth's expression tightened. "The society believed they were cultivating enlightened minds capable of perceiving higher realities. Pierce discovered they were actually preparing human consciousness to be inhabited." The phonograph continued as the subject described shadowy figures visible only in her peripheral vision, present since her return from apparent death. "They move when unobserved," the voice continued. "They learn our world through borrowed senses. They are patient beyond human comprehension." The recording ended with a chilling statement. "I count 9 in this room now. One stands behind the doctor, watching through me as I speak." Werner's words about the society's acceleration haunted me. If they had been cultivating receivers for over a century, how many people now moved through the world with something else looking out through their eyes? In my hotel room that night, I spread Pierce's journal across the bed, searching for patterns. Her final investigations focused on society members who had undergone the threshold experience themselves, the inner circle who voluntarily crossed over and returned. She had tracked their positions of influence through government research institutions, medical facilities, and even space programs. A notation in the margin caught my attention. REM enhancement protocols, NASA Soviet joint research. Following this thread through Pierce's meticulous cross-referencing led to documents about sleep studies conducted during the Cold War. Both superpowers had secretly researched consciousness manipulation while publicly competing in space exploration. The society had placed members on both sides, guiding research toward a shared hidden goal that transcended political divisions. Most disturbing was a series of photographs documenting changes in society members' appearances over decades. Subtle alterations in posture, expression, and even facial structure suggested something gradual yet profound, as if something were slowly remaking them from within. I forced myself to confront the question I'd been avoiding. Was I still fully myself? Had my lifelong whispers already altered my perception, my choices, my identity? Was my investigation driven by my own will, or directed by something using me as its instrument? The hotel mirror reflected a face I recognized yet suddenly doubted. I raised my hand. My reflection did the same. I whispered, "Who's really investigating whom?" In that moment of questioning, for just a fraction of a second, I swore my reflection smiled before my own expression changed. Sleep eluded me after witnessing my reflection's unsettling smile. I paced my hotel room until dawn, trying to distinguish between paranoia and genuine perception. The line between investigator and instrument had blurred beyond recognition. My phone chirped with a message from Dr. Roth. "Come immediately. Found Hollister's actual timepiece." The clock that awaited me in her office appeared unremarkable at first glance, a pocket watch of tarnished silver with elegant engraving. But when Dr. Roth opened its case, the conventional clockwork had been replaced with an intricate mechanism unlike anything I'd seen before. "This arrived anonymously last night," she explained. The note claimed it was recovered from Hollister's grave during cemetery relocation in 1956. The watch's hands moved in opposing directions while smaller dials rotated on independent axes. The entire assembly seemed to operate on principles that defied conventional mechanics. "It's keeping perfect time," Dr. Roth whispered. "But not to our time." Werner studied the timepiece through a magnifying glass. "These markings along the inner bezel, they're coordinates. Not geographical, but temporal." He pointed to notations that resembled calendar dates, yet followed no standard system. Hollister wasn't just a clockmaker. He was mapping moments when the barrier between states grows thinnest. The central date in the sequence corresponded to next Tuesday. "The convergence," I murmured, remembering Pierce's final warning. Dr. Roth's assistant burst into the room, ashen-faced. "They've found us. University security cameras show 4 society members entering the archives an hour ago." Werner slipped Hollister's watch into my hand. "You must leave Vienna immediately. They'll be monitoring airports and train stations." "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, panic rising. "To the origin," Dr. Roth said firmly. "The hospital where it began. Something in that building is significant beyond the photograph. Hollister's watch is counting down to an event that will occur precisely where their experiments started." As Werner hurried me toward a service exit, he pressed a small metal object into my palm, a key with the same triangular symbol. "There's a sealed room in the hospital basement that doesn't appear on any blueprint," he explained. "Pierce believed it contains the Society's first threshold device. They've been returning to it periodically for over a century, strengthening whatever connection they established. How would I even find this room?" "You won't need to," Werner replied with grim certainty. "It will find you. You're a receiver. The frequencies you've heard your entire life emanate from that chamber. Once you're close enough, you'll feel it pulling you." At the door, Dr. Roth grasped my shoulders. "Remember, they believe they're communicating with higher beings, entities of pure consciousness. But Pierce discovered the truth. Whatever waits beyond doesn't represent evolution or enlightenment." "What does it represent?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Hunger," she whispered. "A hunger that has waited eons for vessels capable of sustaining it in our reality. And after a century of preparation, the Society has finally provided enough of them." The journey back to where everything began seemed governed by forces beyond coincidence. Cancelled flights, redirected trains, unexpected detours. Obstacles that might appear random to others carried the unmistakable signature of deliberate interference. Yet each barrier dissolved just as I chose an alternative path, as if 2 opposing forces were simultaneously hindering and guiding my return. Hollister's watch grew warmer against my skin as I approached the city, its mechanism humming with subtle vibration. The hands continued their contradictory rotations, but the secondary dials accelerated with alarming speed. Whatever countdown had begun was approaching its conclusion. The hospital still stood, though now repurposed as a medical research facility. The original 19th century structure remained at its core, surrounded by modern additions. As I approached the wrought iron gates, the whispering intensified. No longer background noise, but a symphony of overlapping voices just below the threshold of comprehension. I found myself walking through the administrative wing with inexplicable confidence, as if navigating from memory rather than following directions. Staff members nodded as I passed, their eyes sliding away with practiced indifference. Whether they were society members or simply conditioned to ignore, I couldn't tell. The basement access required no forced entry. The door stood slightly ajar, a thin wedge of darkness that seemed to beckon. As I descended the worn stone stairs, the watch's vibrations synchronized with my heartbeat, creating a disorienting resonance that made the walls appear to breathe. The old morgue had been converted to storage, but beneath the modern organization lay the unmistakable architecture of the room from the photograph. I could almost superimpose the image over what I now saw. Here stood the tables, there the instrument cabinet, and in that corner, the corner where the smiling observer had stood revealed itself as an oddity in the architecture. A section of wall that didn't quite align with the surrounding stonework. My fingers traced the mortar lines, finding imperceptible seams that conventional examination would miss. The triangular key in my pocket now pulsed with the same rhythm as the watch. When I pressed it against what appeared to be solid stone, the wall yielded like fabric, revealing not a door, but a boundary that dissolved around the key itself. The sealed chamber beyond defied rational description. Its dimensions seemed to shift with each heartbeat, expanding and contracting as if breathing. At its center stood a device that resembled neither Victorian machinery nor modern technology, a configuration of materials arranged in patterns that strained the mind to comprehend. Most disturbing were the markings on the floor. Hundreds of small triangular indentations arranged in concentric circles around the device, each filled with what appeared to be decades of wax drippings. Candles had been placed and replaced in these exact positions for over a century. Against the far wall hung an immense mirror in an ornate frame, its surface not reflective but absorptive, darkness deeper than absence of light. As I approached, Hollister's watch achieved impossible synchronization, all hands and dials suddenly moving in perfect unison. The chamber recognized me, not as an intruder but as something expected, something invited. And in that moment of recognition, I realized I hadn't discovered the society's origins. I had come home to them. The mirror's obsidian surface rippled as I approached, like dark water disturbed by an unseen stone. Hollister's watch burned against my skin, its mechanism now emitting a high-pitched whine that matched the crescendo of whispers filling the chamber. The concentric circles of wax-filled indentations began to glow with a phosphorescent light, illuminating the room in a sickly green radiance that cast no shadows. My reflection should have appeared in that vast mirror, but instead I saw a hospital room from another era. Figures in 19th century medical attire surrounded a table where a man lay motionless, Hollister himself, in the moments before the photograph was taken. The scene was playing out like a window into the past, but something was wrong. The attendants moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, their faces occasionally slipping to reveal something else beneath the human facade. "They've been preparing for 125 years, came a voice behind me. I spun to find Helen Cahill standing in the chamber entrance, but her posture had changed, rigid, formal, with hands clasped before her in a gesture that seemed rehearsed rather than natural. "The society believes they control this process," she continued, her voice carrying unfamiliar cadences. "They imagine themselves shepherds of evolution, midwives to a new consciousness." Such delightful arrogance. "Who are you?" I asked, though I already knew this wasn't truly Helen speaking. Her head tilted at an impossible angle. "I am merely the first to fully cross over. Others wait behind me, learning from my experience in this fascinating vessel." As she spoke, the mirror's surface revealed more scenes, laboratories across different decades, operating theaters in various countries, all showing similar procedures being performed on unaware subjects. In each scene, observers stood in corners, watching with the same distinctive smile I had noticed in the original photograph. "Your kind created doorways without understanding what might come through them," Not Helen said, stepping closer. "The society sought enlightenment but found us instead. We who exist in the spaces between moments, in the pause between heartbeats." The watch in my hand suddenly stopped, all its hands pointing to the triangular symbol at the center of its face. The chamber's humming intensified, and I felt a pressure building in my ears, in my skull, behind my eyes. "What happens during the convergence?" I managed to ask. Her smile widened beyond human proportions. "The membrane separating our realities has been systematically weakened at this location for generations. When Hollister's watch completes its countdown, the barrier will collapse entirely. No more need for threshold states or prepared vessels. We will simply step through." Through the mirror, I could now see hundreds of figures gathering on the other side, pressing against what appeared to be a thinning membrane. Their forms were indistinct, fluid, yet somehow hungry in their movements. "Why show me all this?" I asked, struggling to maintain my sense of self against the intensifying whispers. "Why reveal your plans?" Not Helen's expression shifted to something almost pitying. "Because you misunderstand your role. You were never the investigator." Her hand reached toward my face with unnatural fluidity. "You are the key." My body responded before my mind could process, stumbling backward from Not Helen's reaching hand. The watch in my palm suddenly pulsed with heat, forcing my fingers open. It clattered to the floor, landing precisely in the center of the concentric circles where it began to spin like a compass seeking north. "You've been cultivated since birth," Not Helen continued, her movements becoming increasingly fluid and unnatural. "Your sensitivity to the whispering, your academic interests, your discovery of the photograph, all guided. Even your resistance was anticipated, necessary friction to shape the key." The mirror's surface bulged outward as if something massive pressed against it from the other side. The figures beyond became more distinct, forms that approximated humanity, but with proportions and movements that violated anatomical possibility. Their hunger was palpable, a yearning so intense it manifested as physical pressure in the chamber. "The society believes they'll ascend," Not Helen said, her voice now overlaid with others. "We've let them maintain this delusion for generations while they prepared the way." Understanding crashed over me. The breathing corpses, they weren't experiments gone wrong. They were your first successful crossings. Primitive vessels, but useful for observation. Her smile stretched impossibly wider. "We needed to study your world from the inside, learn its rules, understand its weaknesses." As she spoke, I noticed the patterns formed by the wax-filled indentations matched astronomical configurations. Not random circles, but precise mappings of celestial alignments across different time periods. 125 years of preparations, timed to cosmic movements. "Hollister knew," I whispered. "His clocks weren't just timepieces. He was tracking your progression, warning those who would listen." Not Helen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "He understood too late. His consciousness had already been compromised. His warning became part of the mechanism." The watch spun faster, its metal case beginning to glow with the same phosphorescence as the floor markings. The mirror's surface rippled more violently as the pressure behind it intensified. I could feel the boundary thinning with each passing second. In desperation, I lunged for the watch, but Not Helen moved with impossible speed to block my path. Her fingers elongated as she reached for me, skin splitting to reveal something else beneath, something that had never been human. "The convergence cannot be stopped," she hissed through a mouth that now contained geometries rather than teeth. "The threshold will collapse. We will step through, and your world will finally know true consciousness." The watch gave one final deafening chime. The mirror's surface ruptured like a membrane, dark tendrils reaching into our reality. Not Helen's body contorted as if being remade from within, her form becoming a doorway for something else to emerge. In that moment of cosmic horror, I realized why I had been guided here, not as investigator or even victim, but as witness. Someone who would understand the full implications of what was about to emerge from the spaces between life and death. The tendrils emerging from the ruptured mirror coalesced into forms that hurt the mind to perceive. Geometries that existed in dimensions beyond human comprehension, trying to compress themselves into our limited reality. Not Helen's body continued its grotesque transformation, her skin rippling as if countless creatures moved beneath its surface. her eyes multiplying across her face. I stumbled backward, colliding with the ancient device at the chamber's center. As my hand brushed against its surface, Hollister's watch responded with a counterpoint chime that momentarily disrupted the mirror's rupture. The tendrils paused, vibrating with what seemed like confusion or pain. In that brief moment of disruption, I noticed something I had overlooked. Hollister's signature engraved on the device itself. Not just his name, but hidden within the flourishes of the script were the same equations that had appeared in his later clock designs. He didn't just warn, he built a countermeasure, I gasped, understanding flowing through me with sudden clarity. The clockmaker hadn't been fully compromised. Even as his mind was being infiltrated, he had hidden a failsafe within his craftsmanship. The watch wasn't meant to trigger the convergence, but to sync with this original device at the critical moment, creating a resonance pattern that might seal the breach. Not. Helen sensed my realization, her distorted form lunging toward me with inhuman speed. "The vessel deceived us." The voice was no longer singular, but a chorus of entities speaking through her ruined mouth. Hollister's consciousness was stronger than we anticipated. My hands moved with intuition beyond my knowledge, twisting components of the device that seemed to respond to my touch. The watch levitated from the floor, drawn to the device like a magnet to its opposite pole. When they connected, a shock wave of energy pulsed outward. The mirror's rupture began to close, the hungry entities on the other side shrieking in frequencies that made blood trickle from my ears. Not Helen's body contorted impossibly, as whatever had taken residence within her was forcibly extracted, pulled back toward the closing breach. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the chorus of voices wailed as her form collapsed inward. "We have existed in your world for generations. The vessels we already occupy remain ours." The mirror sealed itself with a thunderous implosion, leaving behind an ordinary reflective surface that showed only the chamber and my terrified face. Helen's body lay crumpled on the floor, empty of whatever had inhabited it. In the sudden silence, I realized the whispering that had accompanied me my entire life had ceased. The constant background noise was gone, leaving a clarity of thought I had never experienced. But not Helen's final words echoed in my mind. The breach might be sealed, but how many had already crossed over during the past century? How many wore human faces while something else looked out from behind their eyes? I gathered Hollister's watch, now fused to a component of the device, its hands frozen in position. The triangular symbol at its center had transformed, the eye within now closed. The convergence had been stopped, but the invasion had begun long ago. As I climbed the stairs back to the world above, I wondered how many of those I would pass were truly human, and how I could possibly identify those who weren't. I stood amid the morning bustle of downtown, watching faces with newfound wariness. Every slight oddity in a stranger's movement, every unnatural pause in conversation, every too-wide smile now carried sinister implications. Was the businessman checking his watch repeatedly just anxious about a meeting? Or was something else controlling his movements? Did the barista's momentary blank stare indicate fatigue, or a consciousness shared with entities from beyond? 3 days had passed since the chamber incident. I'd taken refuge in a modest hotel under a false name, using cash, avoiding digital footprints. The feeling of being watched remained constant, though the whispering had gone silent. In my room, I'd spread out everything collected during my investigation. Photocopies of Hollister's journal entries, Pierce's notes, the photographs of threshold subjects across decades. Patterns emerged that I'd previously missed, particularly in the geographical distribution of society activities. They hadn't operated randomly. Their experiments formed perfect geometric patterns across global maps, creating a vast network of weakened barriers. The sealed chamber might have been the focal point, but it wasn't the only doorway they'd prepared. My phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. Cemetery. Hollister's grave. Midnight. Despite every rational instinct warning against it, I went. The cemetery stood silent under cloud-veiled moonlight. Hollister's grave was modest, weathered by over a century of seasons. As I approached, a figure emerged from behind a nearby mausoleum. Dr. Roth, her face gaunt with exhaustion. "You succeeded," she said simply, The focal point is sealed. But not Helen said others had already crossed over, I replied. How many are already among us? Dr. Roth's expression tightened. We've identified 47 confirmed vessels, society members who underwent voluntary threshold experiences. But there could be hundreds more, people in positions of influence across governments, technologies, sciences. She handed me a small leather pouch. Inside was a monocle-like device with the same intricate workmanship as Hollister's watch. His final creation, Dr. Roth explained, completed weeks before his death but never distributed. When viewed through this lens, those who have been compromised appear differently. I held the device to my eye. The cemetery remained unchanged, but when Dr. Roth stepped into its field of vision, I nearly dropped it in shock. A faint luminescence outlined her form, pulsing slightly with her heartbeat. You've crossed the threshold, I whispered, stepping back. After Eleanor Pierce died, she admitted, I needed to understand what we faced. I induced the state under controlled conditions. Her eyes held mine steadily. But I came back alone. How can I possibly trust that? You can't, she answered simply, just as I can't trust that you returned from that chamber unchanged. We can only judge by actions now. She gestured toward the city lights visible beyond the cemetery walls. The society has splintered after the failed convergence. Some believe it was merely delayed, others that their entities abandoned them. The power vacuum has created something more dangerous. Factions with different agendas, different masters. The weight of understanding settled over me. The battle hadn't ended in that chamber. It had merely transformed. The invasion continued in whispers and shadows, in boardrooms and laboratories, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats where influence could be exerted without detection. What happens now? I asked. Now, Dr. Roth said grimly, we learn to see in the dark. The air in my apartment felt charged with static electricity as I laid out my findings on the kitchen table. 3 months had passed since the cemetery meeting with Dr. Roth. Hollister's viewing device had become my constant companion, revealing the unsettling truth that the compromised walked among us in greater numbers than anyone had suspected. Through the lens, they appeared normal except for the subtle luminescence that outlined their forms, varying in intensity and color depending on the degree of their transformation. Some glowed faintly, perhaps only partially altered. Others burned with such intensity it hurt to look directly at them. The map pinned to my wall documented every sighting, forming a pattern that aligned perfectly with the diagrams in Pierce's journal. The Society's experiments hadn't been randomly distributed, but had followed precise geometric formations across the globe, a vast network designed to weaken the membrane between worlds at specific nodal points. I'd tracked 7 of the original Society members who had undergone voluntary threshold experiences. 5 occupied positions in research institutions dedicated to consciousness studies. 1 directed a pharmaceutical company specializing in neurological medications. The 7th, most disturbingly, oversaw a children's sleep disorder clinic. My phone buzzed with a message from Werner. The Chicago archives are empty. Everything removed yesterday. They're destroying evidence. The systematic elimination of historical records had accelerated in recent weeks. Society members were erasing their own history, removing the breadcrumbs that had allowed me to piece together their century-long preparation for the convergence. The journal Helen had given me before her transformation sat open to a page I'd read countless times. The vessels are merely the first phase. Once established, they begin to remake the world in ways imperceptible to the unaltered. Small changes to social structures, to technologies, to the very way we perceive reality. I studied the photographs of architectural plans designed by compromised society members over the past century, buildings that incorporated subtle geometric patterns in their structures, resonance chambers disguised as ordinary rooms, arrangements of materials that created energetic fields undetectable to conventional instruments. These buildings now housed research facilities, government offices, schools, places where humanity's future was shaped. The clockmaker's viewing device revealed more than just the compromised individuals. It showed how the physical world itself had been slowly transformed. Through its lens, certain buildings glowed with the same luminescence as the vessels, vibrating at frequencies that seemed to harmonize with whatever had crossed over during the past century. Dr. Roth's latest message contained coordinates to locations where the resonance patterns were strongest, potential nodes where new convergence points might be established to replace the one we'd sealed. I examined Hollister's watch, now fused with components from the original threshold device. The hands remained frozen, but something inside still hummed with potential energy, as if waiting for the right moment to resume its countdown. The smiling observers from the original photograph haunted me, not because they had witnessed the beginning of this invasion, but because I now understood they hadn't been observing the subjects at all. They had been watching us, through time itself, patient beyond human comprehension, and somewhere in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, they were still watching, waiting for us to forget, to become complacent, to look away, just for a moment. The luminous web connecting the compromised nodes pulsed visibly through Hollister's lens as I traced the pattern across my global map. What had initially seemed random now revealed itself as a grand design, each node positioned precisely where ley lines intersected, where ancient cultures had built monuments to forces beyond comprehension, where the membrane between worlds naturally thinned. My apartment doorbell rang, shattering my concentration. Through the peephole, Dr. Roth waited, her expression grim. The lens showed her luminescence had intensified since our cemetery meeting. Not the sign of further compromise, but of something else entirely. "It's fighting back," she said without preamble, entering with a weathered leather case. Whatever crossed into Hollister after his threshold experience, it wasn't like the others. She opened the case to reveal clockwork components identical in design to Hollister's watch, but fragmented, as if deliberately dismantled. These were hidden throughout his shop, embedded in the walls, beneath floorboards. Not a single complete device, but parts of dozens distributed to prevent discovery. The pieces hummed with subtle vibration when brought near the watch I'd recovered. Hollister wasn't just warning us, I whispered, understanding dawning. He was creating a counter-network. Dr. Roth nodded. The society believed they controlled which entities crossed over. They never realized some came through that opposed the invasion, consciousness that recognized the danger and took vessels to fight from within. The implications staggered me. You're saying Hollister was compromised, but by something that wanted to stop the convergence? As was Pierce, as am I. Her eyes held mine steadily. Some of us contain multitudes that stand against the tide. Together we assembled the fragmented components, guided by intuition beyond our individual knowledge. The completed device resembled a clockwork planetarium, intricate gears mapping movements not of celestial bodies but of threshold breaches throughout the world. The whispering stopped for you after the chamber incident, Dr. Roth observed. But it didn't cease to exist. You simply stopped receiving it on one frequency. She adjusted the device and suddenly I heard it again. Not the invasive, hungry voices that had haunted me since childhood, but something harmonious, structured, purposeful. The language of resistance. For over a century, two forces have waged war through human vessels, Dr. Roth explained. The society believed themselves architects of evolution, never realizing they were pawns in a much older conflict. The device projected luminous patterns across my apartment walls. The true map not just of compromised locations, but of a counter-network established by Hollister and others like him, vessels containing entities that opposed the invasion. The breathing corpse in the photograph, I said, clarity washing over me. Hollister wasn't the society's victim. He was the first successful counter-vessel. Yes, Dr. Roth confirmed. And now you must choose which voice to amplify. The hungry whispering that seeks dominion, or the harmonious resistance that has fought from within for generations. My hand hovered over the central gear of Hollister's assembled legacy, a choice not just for myself, but for which whispers humanity would ultimately hear. The harmonious whispers guided my fingers as I adjusted the clockwork mechanism, revealing dimensions of the conflict I had barely comprehended. The assembled device projected not just locations, but timelines, showing how the war between these opposing forces had shaped human history long before the society formalized their experiments. The society didn't discover the threshold, I whispered, as understanding crystallized. They were led to it. Dr. Roth nodded solemnly. Humanity has always sensed the membrane between worlds. What do you think inspired our ancient myths of possession, of gods walking among mortals? The threshold has been crossed in both directions throughout history. The projection revealed cycles, periods of increased crossing activity that coincided precisely with historical upheavals, renaissances, dark ages, moments when humanity lurched forward or regressed, guided by unseen influences. The hunger entities seek not just vessels but a permanent doorway, Dr. Roth continued. The convergence would have created not just a bridge but a complete merging of realities. I studied the patterns with growing horror. And the counter-network? What do they want? Balance, she replied. The membrane exists for a reason. Complete separation is as dangerous as complete merging. Consciousness requires boundaries to maintain identity. The watch component suddenly aligned with a specific gear, and the projection shifted to show what had been hidden in plain sight. The original photograph from 1896. But now, viewed through the combined power of Hollister's devices, it revealed its true nature. The breathing corpse was indeed alive, but the other four bodies were not what they appeared. They weren't dead humans, but temporary vessels, shells created to house entities attempting a crossing that Hollister had interrupted. The morgue wasn't documenting death, but an attempted invasion that had been thwarted. The society's fundamental mistake, Dr. Roth said quietly, was believing they were the experimenters. They never realized they were the experiment. The smiling observer in the photograph's corner now appeared in perfect clarity. Not human at all, but something wearing human appearance like an ill-fitting mask, watching as its plans were disrupted by Hollister's unexpected resistance. The hunger entities have been attempting convergence for millennia, I said, the truth unfolding before me. The society was their most sophisticated tool, manipulated into building a doorway under the guise of enlightenment. Dr. Roth's luminescence pulsed, and Hollister was the first to recognize it and fight back. His consciousness merged with something that opposed the hunger, something that understood the catastrophic implications of a complete merging of realities. The truth echoed through me. We existed in equilibrium between opposing forces, the hunger that sought to consume and possess, and the harmony that maintained the necessary boundaries between worlds. Humanity wasn't merely caught in the crossfire, we were the battlefield itself. The breathing corpse wasn't evidence of the society's experiments, I said. It was evidence of the resistance's first victory. The final piece clicked into position in Hollister's assembled device, sending a pulse of energy through my apartment that made the air shimmer like heat waves over summer asphalt. The walls between worlds thinned momentarily, not breaking but becoming translucent. Through this temporary window, I glimpsed what truly existed in the spaces between life and death. Not darkness, but light of impossible complexity. Patterns of consciousness that made our most advanced mathematics seem like a child's counting blocks. They've been preparing for the next attempt, Dr. Roth said, her voice cutting through my awe. The failed convergence was merely a setback. The hunger entities have been recalibrating, using their existing vessels to establish new threshold points. The projection showed alarming concentrations forming across major population centers, new society chapters operating under different names, medical research facilities specializing in consciousness studies, technology companies developing brain-computer interfaces. Each served as a vector for influence, subtly reshaping human perception to accept what should remain separate. How do we possibly fight something this vast? I asked, overwhelmed by the scope of the conflict. Dr. Roth placed Hollister's viewing lens in my hand, closing my fingers around it. By seeing clearly, by helping others to see, resistance begins with recognition. The harmonious whispers that had replaced the hungry ones formed into coherent thought. The membrane between worlds exists not as barrier, but as definition. Without it, neither side can maintain integrity. Understanding washed over me. The hunger entities didn't simply want to cross over. They wanted to dissolve the boundary completely, creating a reality where distinction between consciousness ceased to exist. Not a merging, but a consumption. Hollister's network wasn't built to seal the threshold permanently, I realized. It was designed to maintain the necessary separation while still allowing communication. Dr. Roth nodded. Balance requires exchange, not isolation. Complete separation would be as catastrophic as complete merging. We need the membrane intact, but permeable in controlled ways. The implications stretched beyond our immediate struggle into philosophical territory. Humanity had never been truly isolated in our consciousness. We had always existed in conversation with other forms of being, influenced but not determined by voices from beyond our perception. The society members who realize they've been manipulated are beginning to defect, Dr. Roth said, indicating blinking points on the projection where the luminous web showed disruptions. Confronted with the truth, many choose resistance. Outside my window, the city continued its night rhythm, unaware of the war being waged for reality itself. People moved through their lives, making choices they believed were entirely their own, never sensing the whispers that guided or misled them. I understood now why Hollister had hidden his devices rather than destroying them, why Pierce had preserved evidence rather than exposing it publicly. Direct confrontation would only strengthen the hunger entity's influence. The resistance required subtlety, patience, and precision, qualities the clockmaker had embedded in every gear and spring of his legacy. We begin tomorrow, I said, watching the projection shift to show potential nodes where Hollister's counter-network could be reinforced. One clock at a time. The photograph that started everything now rested in an acid-free archival sleeve, sealed within a custom-built case of Hollister's design, clockwork locks responding only to the specific resonance of his viewing lens. Not destroyed, but protected. Evidence too dangerous to expose, yet too vital to eliminate. I traced my finger along the edge of the case, remembering how differently I now understood what it contained. Not merely a morgue image with one anomalous breathing body, but documentation of the first successful resistance against an ancient invasion. The society had unwittingly preserved proof of their own manipulation, a record that would guide those who followed in Hollister's path. Dr. Roth and I had spent the past month establishing new nodes in the counter-network, placing Hollister's reassembled devices at precise coordinates. Each installation strengthened the membrane between worlds without sealing it completely, maintaining the delicate equilibrium needed for both realities to remain distinct yet connected. The work had transformed me. The whispering now served as guidance rather than intrusion, the harmonious voice of resistance providing insights that my human perception alone could never achieve. I understood now that I had never been merely human. I had always existed as a conversation between worlds, a consciousness shaped by influences from both sides of the threshold. Werner had taken Hollister's viewing lens to Europe, identifying compromised vessels within institutions of power and offering them the choice I had been given: to see clearly, to understand their manipulation, to join the resistance if they wished. Many chose to fight against the hunger that had partially consumed them, their luminescence shifting from hungry red to harmonious blue as they reclaimed aspects of their original selves. The original photograph had revealed one final secret under the combined power of all Hollister's devices. Microscopically etched into the silver halide of the image itself was a complete blueprint of the counter-network, hidden by the clockmaker in the most obvious yet overlooked location. The society had carried the seeds of resistance in their own historical archive, never recognizing what lay beneath the surface of their evidence. I would never be the person I was before finding that image. The threshold had been crossed, not by invading entities taking my consciousness, but by understanding that expanded my perception beyond conventional human limits. I existed now as more than I had been, carrying within me both my humanity and something else that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. Tomorrow I would return to the university with new eyes, watching for signs of the hunger entity's influence while subtly reinforcing Hollister's network. The war would continue without most of humanity ever knowing it was being fought, a shadow conflict waged through whispers and subtle manipulations, through dreams and inspirations, through the quiet influence of competing voices that had always shaped human history. The breathing corpse in the photograph, Hollister himself, had left us the tools to maintain the necessary balance. His legacy wasn't merely warning but instruction, a clockwork mechanism designed to keep two worlds properly aligned without allowing either to consume the other. The moonlight filtered through my study window as I arranged the final pieces of Hollister's legacy across my desk. Each component, recovered from archives, private collections, and hidden caches, formed part of a system more intricate than I had first understood. Not merely devices to identify the compromised or maintain the membrane between worlds, but a comprehensive language for communicating with the harmonious entities that had allied with humanity for generations. Tomorrow would mark 1 year since I discovered the breathing corpse photograph. In that time, our counter-network had expanded across 27 countries, identifying and reclaiming nearly 200 compromised vessels. Some fought against the revelation, their hunger-bound consciousness rejecting the truth. Others embraced it with profound relief, as if finally understanding the whispers that had haunted them for years. The most remarkable discovery came 3 weeks ago in Vienna, where Werner uncovered Hollister's personal diary. Not the publicly known journal, but his actual private thoughts, recorded in a cipher that required his viewing lens to decode. The entries revealed that Hollister hadn't merely been the first to resist, he had been deliberately chosen. The entities beyond the threshold have their own conflicts, he wrote in 1897. What the society perceives as a unified force is actually a multitude of consciousnesses with competing intentions. The hunger represents only one faction, those who would consume rather than commune. His final entry, dated days before his death, contained the most profound insight. Humanity itself is the ultimate threshold, a consciousness capable of housing both the hunger and the harmony, forever balanced between consumption and creation. We are not merely the battlefield. We are the reason for the war. I understood now why the photograph had seemed so ordinary yet proved so significant. The society had documented what they believed was their work, never realizing they were capturing evidence of a much older conversation, one that had shaped human consciousness since we first gained awareness of our own existence. Dr. Roth's theory proved correct. The membrane between worlds wasn't meant to isolate but to define, to maintain the necessary tension between opposing forces that created the very possibility of conscious experience. Without separation, there could be no relationship. Without boundaries, no meaningful exchange. The global map on my wall now showed hundreds of luminous points where Hollister's devices maintained this delicate equilibrium. Not a defensive barrier, but a communication network, allowing controlled exchange without consumption. The hunger entities continued their attempts at full convergence, but each was met with precise countermeasures from our growing resistance. As midnight approached, I completed the final calibration of Hollister's master device, the mechanism he had begun building in his shop but never lived to complete. Tomorrow it would be installed at the original chamber where everything began, transforming that attempted invasion point into a regulated threshold that would allow communication without conquest. I lifted the breathing corpse photograph one last time, seeing beyond its surface to the cosmic struggle it documented. The image that had haunted me now represented not horror but hope, evidence that humanity had faced this threat before and found a way to maintain our precarious balance between worlds. Autumn leaves scattered across the cemetery path as I knelt before Hollister's grave, placing his completed master device at its base. The weathered headstone had been recently cleaned, revealing an inscription I'd overlooked on previous visits. Not just dates and name, but a message hidden within decorative scrollwork. The threshold remains. Choose which voices to heed. 5 years had passed since discovering the breathing corpse photograph. In that time, our network had grown from desperate resistance to established equilibrium. The hunger entities still sought convergence, but each attempt was now met with precise, calibrated response. Not destruction, but redirection, maintaining the necessary separation while allowing controlled communication. The viewing lens revealed what ordinary perception could not. Luminous pathways connecting threshold points worldwide, a living web that pulsed with both the hungry red of consumption and the harmonious blue of communion. Not a battle of elimination, but a constant rebalancing, an eternal conversation between opposing aspects of consciousness itself. Last month, I returned to the university archives where everything began. The breathing corpse photograph had been restored to its original place in the collection, though few would ever understand its true significance. To most researchers, it remained merely an odd medical anomaly from the 19th century. To those with eyes to see, it represented humanity's eternal position, poised between worlds, forever breathing in the space between life and death. The society continues its work under various guises, though many former members have joined our counter-network after recognizing their manipulation. The hunger never ceases, but neither does the harmony. Both whisper their influences, both shape our dreams and inspirations. Both represent aspects of consciousness that define existence itself. I no longer fear the whispering. I've learned to distinguish between voices, to recognize consumption disguised as enlightenment, to hear harmony beneath apparent discord. This discernment represents humanity's greatest strength, our ability to house opposing influences while maintaining our own distinct identity. Sometimes I wonder if Hollister foresaw how far his resistance would extend, if he understood, as his consciousness merged with something beyond human comprehension, that he was establishing not just opposition but balance. His clockwork legacy continues its quiet ticking beneath the surface of ordinary perception, maintaining thresholds that protect distinction without preventing communion. Yesterday, a young archivist contacted me about a curious photograph she'd discovered from 1923. 5 bodies in a different morgue, one subtly breathing, a familiar triangular symbol visible in the corner. The cycle continues, new eyes awakening to the ancient conversation, new minds joining the resistance that is not opposition, but equilibrium. I placed my hand on Hollister's headstone, feeling the subtle vibration that indicated his network remained active, his consciousness somehow present in the mechanism he created. The breathing corpse had never truly died. He had simply found a different way to exist in the spaces between heartbeats, guarding the threshold he helped establish. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.